Well, my last video was about Happy Days, and that TV series. What made it interesting were all the characters, which might seem a little they might seem a little bit far fetched looking back at the reruns, but actually there were a lot of interesting characters back then, as there are now. I mean, we didn't have a monopoly on that, but um, some of the people that I met were very interesting. And a lot of that had to do with working in my dad's store. And of course, in the summer, I would work there full time. And when it was located on Ponce de Leon Avenue in Atlanta, we got a lot of interesting folks come in there. My dad repaired Autocon cameras. Now, this is back before the day of the video cameras. So everything that was done for the news was done 16 millimeter. And the Autocon camera was unique in that it actually filmed a soundtrack on the film itself. Excuse me. The quality wasn't the best in the world, but it was there was no post-production issues. In other words, the sound was always in sync. And so they could take the film into the studio and process it, and as soon as it dried, they could slap it up on the screen complete with sound. But at any rate, those were very expensive cameras. I think back then they sold for about $5,000. Now, that's back when it was real money. You could buy a new car for about $2,500. So that gives you some idea of how valuable these were. So the TV stations didn't have many because they were a huge capital investment. So you usually had two. But anyway, when one of those would break, they wanted to get it back into service quickly, and my dad could repair those. And they would send the cameras out to our store by taxi. And the taxi driver was instructed to wait with the meter running on his cab until my dad could fix the camera, and then they'd take it back to the studio. That's how time sensitive it was. So that's the kind of world we lived in. There was a live show on one of the channels in Atlanta called Live Atlanta Wrestling. And I was fortunate in that one of our customers, professional photographer, hired me to film the highlights of that. So basically, I would do that from the side of the ring. I usually just propping the camera up, my elbows right on the mat, and filming scenes. Back then, and it was probably that way to this day, a lot of what you'd see was fake. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the sport because basically those guys were big, heavy guys. And when they picked up another guy and threw him over their head, I mean, that required a lot of strength and a lot of training to not hurt the other guy. I mean, they weren't really there to hurt anybody because they were all making a living doing that. But at any rate, they would, whoever was orchestrating all that would come up to me and said, "Okay, you need to film this next scene. There's going to be something exciting happen." So anyway, and then those clips would appear in the highlights for the next week's show. That was done in silent 16 millimeter. There was no way they were going to pay me to have an Autocon camera up there filming that. But that gives you some idea of the some of the people I rub shoulders with. A very colorful crowd. And in terms of people who came into our shop, one of the most interesting characters was um, the grandson of the founder of Coca-Cola. I forgot what his first name was. May have never known it, but anyway, he was a candler and had a mansion down in the southern area of Ponce Leon, which was known as Mansion Row. At any rate, he would come into our store, and I don't know how he got there. I don't know whether he walked. I can't imagine that's too much of a walk, or whether he came on the bus or by cab, or exactly how he came. But he would always be dressed in the summer in a straw hat and uh, khaki pants. And, in other words, he looked like a gardener, and I assumed he was until one day he came in with this leather case and opened it up, and it was filled with Hasselblad. You won't know what the Hasselblad is, but it was a very expensive camera for professional photographers, and the lenses. And then he had several Leica cameras. And anyway, in that case was probably $3,000 or $4,000 worth of equipment. Here again, back when that was real money. So after he left, I asked my dad, how can a gardener afford all that? He said, no. He said, that's A.C. Chandler's grandson. A.C. Candler, grandson. I said, well, who's that? He said, well, he started a company called Coca-Cola here in Atlanta. So at any rate, as I understand it, he was probably worth $50-60 million back when that was real money. And sadly, he was murdered in his mansion. They never did figure out who killed him. A lot of speculation. It might have been one of the heirs who was jealous of. Since it was never solved, the speculation is unending. Let's see some other interesting people. Here again, you have to be old or see a lot of old reruns to recognize the character Cisco Kid. This was a 1950s era cowboy movie. And the guy wore this big sombrero and black outfit with all studs and whatnot. Anyway, next door to Dad's store was a locksmith shop. Or maybe that was two doors down. Next door, I think, was a music store. Anyway, on the same little area there, we see him outside, all dressed in his thing, And what had happened is he had a live show he was going to do down at Cracker Stadium, Georgia Crackers baseball team. And he was all dressed up and going to get his horse out of the horse trailer and realized he had lost his key. So he pulled up there with his horse trailer and everything into that locksmith shop so that the guy could unlock his trailer. Didn't get to talk to him. He was apparently going to be running late, and he was in the dither to get his thing done and get out of there. And that would have been, oh man, 5 or 6 years after the series had ended. But he was still popular enough. He was doing small venues like Cracker Stadium. Let's see. Some of our regular customers, Andrew Young, who ultimately became the ambassador of the UN and civil rights leader. Some infamous characters, sort of, was And boy, his name just escaped me. I'll have to come back to him when it comes back to me. The Secretary of State uh, would come into our store frequently. Jimmy Carter twice. And one of the strangest ones was there was a music store right next door. And so these shaggy haired individuals, this was early 60s, came in and they were really dissing the store. You know, this is a quaint little shop, da, 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 da. And they had an English accent. So anyway, that was time of the Beatles and whatnot. But anyway, that was the Alice Cooper group band. They were popular for a short period of time, then dropped out. But they impressed me as being rather uncouth and impolite characters. Sam Nunn, who was senator for years and years and years, and was the Secretary of Defense for a large number of years. He would come in. So anyway, we saw a lot of interesting folks. Um, I got to tell one story, and I'll have to leave the names out of this one. But we had a photographer. He happened to be black. We had black customers, even during the time of desegregation. We never discriminated, and so, but he was colorful, and they called him Count. And I won't give his last name, but they called him Count, and he was dressed to the T's, and he had a cane. He wasn't. He didn't need the cane, but he carried it for the effect, I guess, with a silver head on the top of it. And he was a professional photographer, and pretty much was the prestigious photographer for the black community for weddings and events, whatever. So anyway, he left a camera off. This is back in the days when they used those big old Crown graphic cameras with the bellows and use flash bulbs. And, you know, you'll see them on some of the old programs, TV programs or movies. And anyway, he left his camera. Well, professional photographers, when they leave their equipment off for repair, they wanted it back quickly because that was their livelihood. So anyway, a month later, it was still sitting on her shelf, hadn't been picked up. So one day, a woman came in, and she says, "I'm here to pick up the Count's camera." And well, my dad didn't know her from anybody, and he wasn't going to release that camera to her. And then she explained. She says, "Well, I'm the Count's wife." And my dad said, "Well, why didn't he come? Why didn't he come to pick it up?" She says, "Well, I shot and killed him." And she really had. What we didn't know was that he apparently was not so genteel to his wife, and she had a restraining order against him, and he showed up beating on her door with his cane, and she just shot him right through the door. So anyway, my dad took just a few minutes to try to verify the story, and then finally released the camera to her. She paid for the repair. I assumed she would just sell the camera. I have no idea, but I thought that was interesting circumstance. Oh, another character, and I won't use his name either, but he put together a company to do a TV uh, series pilot, and he hired me for to be the cinematographer. And this would have been in the, well, I'm jumping ahead really. This was 1970, 71, because I was already married. And, so Brenda and I uh, did that together. She handled the sound and I handled the camera and the filming. The name of the corporation was Backyard Productions. The reason for that, it was all done outside, and it was supposed to compete with a program, hit TV program called Hee Haw, country western kind of thing, country mostly. Anyway, met some really interesting characters for that. Not from the, I mean, most of those country singers, all their songs pretty much reflect their real life. Pretty colorful crowd. And there was a guy who would come up, his daughter was performing. She was a singer. And he would come to the set. He owned a nightclub out in Hateville, Georgia, near the automobile plants. And his daughter had grown up there. That's where she started her singing career. And so Mr. Tucker, one morning he showed up and he was calling a blanket, coddling, and pretending it was a child, right? but pretty soon it was revealed that it was a half gallon of whiskey. And he had been consuming some of it. At any rate, but his daughter, who could, she must have been 17 or 18 at the time, had a beautiful voice. And of course, at that time, she was unknown, but that was Tanya Tucker. So we filmed that, and the main star of the thing, who was in his band, that project came to an abrupt end when he was performing and had an aneurysm and was dead by the time he hit the floor. And the producer had been negligent in getting the releases signed. And that guy's widow refused to release his footage. So basically, that project was dead instantly because we couldn't use any of the footage we'd shot. If we had had any idea of the future of Tanya Tucker, we could have at least cut out that one scene that might have been worth something. But I'm not sure he ever had her sign a release either. So he was a strange individual. He was manic depressive. When he was manic, man, he was gifted. I mean, he put together this production. Everybody got stock in the corporation instead of pay. He provided all the money for the film processing, post-production, all that stuff. But on the other hand, when I had never seen him in his depressed stage. So shortly thereafter, he comes to the back door of our store. I let him in, knew him, and he squats down behind a packing counter and he said, "What's going on?" He says, "They're after me." He says, if anybody comes in looking for me, you don't know me. At any rate, he wouldn't leave. So finally we called his mother, Now, this guy's in his 30s. Called his mother, and she came down and talked to him home, I guess. But anyway, that's when we learned he was manic depressive. So, but it's a great experience. I mean, I didn't make a dime, but we got to meet some really, truly interesting people. Let's see. If I sat here long enough, I could surely think of many others. I had one customer. He's another case of somebody who had money, didn't look like he had money. He would come in, he was in coveralls. And so he bought some equipment that was going to require me carrying it out and putting it in his car. So I go out there and he's got a brand new Rolls Royce. So I load that in the trunk, and I'm just flabbergasted. This guy, in coveralls is driving around probably cost $100,000 back then when it was real money. And I said, "Oh, this is a beautiful car." He says, he said, "The Rolls Royce is the cheapest car to own." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," he said, "your first one's going to cost you about $100,000. But he says, I can drive it 3 or 4 years and it's worth more used than what I paid for it. And then I buy another one." But you got to have the 100,000 up front. So that precluded me ever having one. But just strange crowd. And my brother, who by that time was working in the business as well, he was fortunate enough to land a contract when they were putting in another runway in Atlanta, Hartsfield Airport. He would go up every day in a helicopter to take progress pictures. Now, I'm 75 years old, and I've never been on a helicopter. He rode in one every day for about 6, 8 months. So we were blessed. I mean, really, my dad was a great boss. Shared so much information and took the time to show us things that, I mean, that's the greatest education I ever had. He got me started into electronics before I ended up in the Air Force in electronics school. So I had a little bit of a head start there. I was already a ham radio operator. I flew airplanes, raced cars, raced motorcycles. And I did all that from a tiny, tiny paycheck. Of course, that was back when it was real money. Several times in my videos, I talk about when I refer to what we were paid or what we paid for things, I add the statement, when that was real money. Most people don't realize that we left the gold standard completely in 1971, meaning that the government was no longer obligated to redeem your dollars in gold. So at that point in time, it became truly a fiat currency. So I'm going to put some links down in the description to explain this a little better, but that's what I'm referring to when I say cut this back when it was real money. It's running pretty long. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and notify. Thanks.